The house was eerily quiet. The air thick with the weight of something unspeakable, something that shouldn't have happened. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her heart racing as she stared at the scene in front of her. The lifeless bodies of her family members lay scattered across the floor, each one a brutal testament to the violence that had unfolded within these walls. Her father, the man who had raised her, stood in the middle of the room. Covered in blood. His eyes, once filled with love, now empty, devoid of any sign of humanity. He looked at her as if nothing had happened. As if the world hadn't just shattered in a single moment. "Why, Dad?" The words barely left her lips, trembling in the silence. Her voice felt small, swallowed by the horror around her. He didn't answer. He just stared, a strange calmness in his expression. Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. This was not the man she had known. This was something else, something unrecognizable. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She didn't know how long she stood there, trying to make sense of what her eyes were telling her. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. Her father wasn't capable of such brutality. She had to be dreaming. She closed her eyes tightly, hoping that when she opened them, it would all go away. But when she opened them again, the same scene greeted her. The blood. The bodies. The unnatural stillness. Her hands began to shake. She reached out to steady herself against the doorframe, as if it could anchor her to reality. Her father, the man who had always been her rock, her protector, now stood as an embodiment of something far more sinister. What had happened to him? What had driven him to this point? "Dad," she whispered again, though her voice broke in her throat. The words felt like they were being ripped from her chest, each syllable heavy with disbelief. Still, he didn't speak. His eyes remained vacant, emotionless. It was as though he had become a stranger. A cold, unfeeling stranger. Her mind raced, the questions swirling faster than she could process them. How had it come to this? Had she missed the signs? Had something been wrong all along? She couldn't remember the last time they'd shared a conversation that felt normal. Had he been hiding his true self beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to snap? Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound, the unmistakable wail of sirens growing louder with every passing second. They were coming. The police. Soon, they would be here to ask questions. They would want answers. But Sarah already knew there would be no simple answer to what had happened. How could there be? She took a step back, the weight of her father's gaze pulling her in. Was it fear? Or was it something else? Was it guilt? Regret? She couldn't tell, but it felt as if there was something more beneath his silence, something hidden in the depths of his eyes that spoke of secrets, of things that had yet to be revealed. She glanced around the room, her gaze drifting over the bodies of her mother, her younger brother, her aunt. All of them lay still, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. How had it happened? How had they ended up here, in this house, on this night? She felt a sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't just the horror of seeing her family dead. It was the realization that her father, the man she had loved and trusted, had done this. The truth was too much to bear. But she couldn't look away. She couldn't turn and run. Not now. Not when the truth, the answers she needed, were so close. She had to understand what had happened, what had caused her father to snap, to kill everyone except her. Why had she been spared? What was it about her that had kept her alive? Her head spun as she took a cautious step forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She moved toward her father slowly, deliberately, as if approaching a wild animal. She didn't know if she was afraid of him, or if she was simply afraid of what he might say, what he might reveal. Her fingers brushed against the blood-stained carpet as she knelt down beside her brother's lifeless body. The warmth of the blood on the floor burned her skin, but she ignored it, focusing only on her father. The man she had once called Dad seemed like a distant memory now. The rage and sorrow in her chest had erased that image, replacing it with a horrifying new version of him, a stranger who had done the unthinkable. Why did you do it? She whispered, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. She didn't know what answer she was expecting, but it felt like she needed him to speak. She needed to hear something, anything, to help her make sense of this madness. Still, there was nothing. Just silence. Her father's blank stare never wavered, never showed any sign of remorse or guilt. He stood there as if waiting for something, or someone. But what? Who could possibly understand what had happened here? A sickening thought crossed Sarah's mind. What if there was more to the story? What if her father wasn't the monster she thought him to be? What if he had been forced into this? What if someone had pushed him to the edge, made him do this? The questions consumed her. She needed to know the truth. But where did she start? How did she begin to unravel the mystery that had led to this gruesome scene? Her mind was racing, and she felt a strange, cold determination welling up inside her. She wasn't just going to stand there, paralyzed by fear. She was going to uncover the truth. She was going to find out why her father had done this, no matter the cost. The sirens grew louder. Closer. She had to move, had to make a decision. Stay or leave? There was no time to waste. If she ran now, would she ever have the courage to come back? To face the truth? The answer came quickly, almost instinctively. She wasn't going to run. Not anymore. She wasn't going to hide from the truth. No matter how dark or twisted it might be. She stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her, and turned toward her father once more. I will find out the truth, Dad. No matter what it takes. The words hung in the air like a promise, a vow she made to herself. As the police cars pulled into the driveway, she knew one thing for certain, this was only the beginning. The truth was out there, and she would stop at nothing to uncover it. The room was filled with the distant sound of sirens, their wail growing louder with each passing second. Sarah's heart beat wildly in her chest as she stood frozen, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like an invisible force. The blood on the floor seemed to spread out further with every blink, every moment feeling like it stretched out endlessly. She could still hear her father's breathing, shallow, slow, as though he had no care in the world for what had just transpired. Her mind was a whirlwind, a storm of questions that spun uncontrollably. Why had her father killed everyone? Why had he spared her? What was the reason behind this madness? And why now? She forced herself to take a deep breath, her lungs burning as she tried to gather her scattered thoughts. There was no time to waste. The police would be here soon, and she had to make sense of this. She couldn't just wait for them to walk in and arrest her father. Something was wrong, and she needed to understand it before the answers were taken away from her. Turning away from her father, Sarah walked to the hallway, her hands trembling as she touched the walls for support. She couldn't look at the bodies anymore. She couldn't face the faces of her mother, her younger brother, or her aunt. The horror was too much to bear. She had to find answers, but where would she even begin? As she stepped into the kitchen, her mind went back to the moments before the chaos. What had she been doing? How had she missed the signs? Her father had never shown any signs of violence before. Sure, he had been distant in the past few weeks, but nothing that would have pointed to this. Nothing that would explain why he would take a life, let alone several. Her fingers ran over the cold countertop, tracing the outline of a knife that lay discarded. Her thoughts clouded again. Had her father used that? Was this where the madness had started? Was the knife the weapon that had ended the lives of her family? Suddenly, a memory flashed in her mind. It was brief, but sharp, a conversation from the night before, a conversation that had seemed ordinary at the time but now felt like an omen. She had been sitting at the dinner table with her father and mother, laughing about some trivial thing, when her father had been unusually quiet. When Sarah had asked him what was on his mind, he'd given her an odd smile. Sometimes, Sarah, he had said, his voice unusually low, you find yourself on the edge, and you don't know how you got there. At the time, Sarah had brushed it off. It had seemed like a strange remark, but not alarming. Maybe it had been. Maybe that was when the darkness had begun to take hold of him. Her mind returned to the present as she heard the sirens finally stop. The crunch of gravel beneath tires told her that the police had arrived. They would be here in moments, and she wasn't ready. But she had no choice. There was no more time to linger in the shadows of confusion. It was now or never. Sarah rushed back to the living room, where her father still stood motionless in the center of the room. His eyes were now slightly narrowed, but there was still no hint of recognition or regret in his gaze. It was as though he was waiting for something, or someone. The front door burst open, and 2 uniformed officers rushed inside. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her pulse pounding in her ears. They didn't acknowledge her at first, their eyes immediately going to the bodies scattered around the room. One of the officers, a man in his late 30s with a stern face, stopped in his tracks, his mouth falling slightly open as he took in the scene. He then turned to his partner, who was looking down at a bloody trail leading from the kitchen. "What the hell happened here?" the first officer muttered, his voice shaking slightly. It was clear that even he hadn't expected this kind of scene. The second officer moved quickly towards Sarah, his face grim. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Sarah nodded, though her mind felt far from okay. She couldn't focus on the officer right now. She couldn't focus on the questions they would ask her. She needed answers. And she had to start with her father. "Why did he do it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "We need to talk to him first," the second officer said, pointing toward Sarah's father. Sarah's eyes followed his finger. The silence in the room felt suffocating as the officers began moving toward her father. For a moment, she thought they would arrest him immediately, that they would drag him away without a second thought. But to her surprise, the officers stopped in front of him. They didn't speak, and they didn't make a move to take him in. Instead, they just watched him, as though they were waiting for something to happen. "What is he doing?" Sarah asked, a chill creeping up her spine. The first officer shook his head. "We don't know yet. But something's wrong. We need to figure out why." One of the officers pulled out a pair of handcuffs. But as he reached for Sarah's father, something strange happened. Her father slowly lifted his hand, his fingers curled into a fist. It wasn't a threatening gesture. It was almost as if he was signaling for them to stop. "Don't," he said, his voice raspy but clear. The officers froze, uncertainty filling their eyes. "Why?" the officer asked cautiously. Her father's eyes flicked to Sarah. His gaze briefly softening before hardening again. "Because it's not what it seems. You don't understand yet." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her father's voice was strange, distant, detached. The man she had known, the father who had always been there for her, was slipping away, leaving behind something she couldn't understand. "Explain it to them," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Tell them what happened." Her father's eyes flicked to her once more, but there was no emotion in his gaze. He looked at her as though she was a stranger, and for the first time, Sarah was afraid of him. What had he become? "I can't," he said simply, as though it was the only thing he could offer. "You wouldn't believe me even if I did." The words hit Sarah harder than she could have imagined. What did he mean? What couldn't he say? The uncertainty, the fear, the confusion, it all swirled inside her, threatening to drown her. The officers looked at each other, their uncertainty growing. "We're going to need a statement," the second officer said, trying to steady himself. "I don't know what to say," Sarah murmured. "I don't know what happened. I don't know what he did." Before they could say anything more, a voice cut through the tension in the room. It was faint, barely audible, but it still rang with clarity. "It's all part of the plan," a voice said. Sarah turned toward her father, who now seemed almost distant, as though he wasn't fully there. "What?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" Her father's face twitched. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. Instead, he turned to the officers. I've waited for this day, he said, his voice now low and steady. The truth will come out. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their hands hovering over their holsters. I don't think we can handle this, one of the officers said. We need backup. Now. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What was going on? Why did it feel like this was just the beginning? What was her father hiding? What truth was he talking about? She didn't know. But she would find out. The police had called for backup, but it felt like an eternity before more officers arrived. The air in the room grew heavier with every passing minute, and Sarah could feel it pressing in on her chest. Her father stood silently, his eyes distant, as if he had retreated into a world of his own. The officers were still unsure of what to do, and their tension was palpable. What had just unfolded in this house was beyond anything they had ever dealt with before. Sarah's mind raced. Her father's cryptic words echoed in her head, the unsettling sentence repeating itself in a loop, the truth will come out. What truth? What was he hiding, and why had he spared her? The house had always been a place of comfort. It had been her sanctuary, her home. But now, it felt like a foreign land, a place where danger lurked in every shadow, and no one could be trusted. Not even the man who had raised her. As much as she wanted to deny it, the facts were staring her in the face. Something was very wrong. She glanced at the officers, still hovering near her father. One was speaking on the radio, the other scribbling down notes. Neither of them seemed to have any answers, and that only added to Sarah's sense of confusion and fear. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched her spiraling thoughts. You need to tell us what happened, ma'am, the first officer said, his voice tight but trying to be reassuring. We can't help your father unless we know what we're dealing with. Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands, clenched into fists. The shock of the situation hadn't worn off, but she knew she had to hold it together. She couldn't afford to break down now. Her mind was clouded, but a part of her knew that the answers wouldn't come from anyone but her father. He was fine yesterday, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She looked back at her father, who hadn't moved an inch since the officers arrived. We had dinner, we talked. Everything seemed normal. The officer nodded but didn't respond right away. He stepped closer to Sarah, lowering his voice. Do you know if your father had any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him or your family? Sarah shook her head, the words caught in her throat. No. I don't. I don't know what happened. Everything was fine. The officer paused, as though weighing his next words carefully. It's important to stay calm. But the scene in there, it's not something that happens overnight. There had to be signs. Something that led to this. Sarah swallowed hard. I don't know, she said again. But I'm telling you, he wasn't like this. He was always kind, always there for us. The officer glanced at his partner, who nodded as if signaling him to continue. We'll take your statement, ma'am, but we'll need to talk to your father as well. We need to understand why he did this. Sarah felt a sharp pang in her chest. The thought of her father being questioned, being treated like a criminal, hurt more than she could put into words. He wasn't a killer. He couldn't be. But then why had he killed everyone except her? And why was he so calm about it? Why had he spared her life? The questions echoed endlessly in her mind, drowning out everything else. The sound of more sirens approaching jolted Sarah from her thoughts. She looked at the officers, but their attention had already shifted back to her father. The second officer, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. Do you know what's going on with him? He asked, his voice low, almost to himself. Sarah glanced over her shoulder at her father, still standing in the center of the room. His face was expressionless, almost lifeless. His eyes seemed to be locked onto something only he could see, some distant place where none of them could follow. I don't know, she said softly. I don't know what's happening. The officer looked down at his notepad, scribbling something briefly before he looked back at Sarah. We'll need to take him into custody. But he's not in a state to answer questions right now. We need to figure out if he's fit for questioning. Sarah's heart dropped at the mention of her father being taken into custody. The thought of him being dragged away from her was unbearable. She had no answers for the police, no explanations. She had no idea what was really going on, and that was a terrifying realization. But just as the officer was about to step forward, something changed. Her father moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. His eyes focused, and he raised his head as though something had snapped him back into the present. He turned to face the officers, his gaze steady, almost eerie. "I don't need to be taken anywhere," he said in a low voice that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "I know what happened. And I know what's coming." The officer stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What do you mean, sir?" Her father's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was not the smile of someone who had just committed an unimaginable act. It was the smile of someone who had accepted something, someone who knew something the rest of them didn't. His voice remained calm, eerily calm. "I'm not going anywhere," he repeated. "You'll all find out soon enough." Sarah's stomach twisted in knots. The words made no sense. He wasn't speaking in a way that reflected guilt, fear, or even remorse. He was speaking like a man who had already made peace with his actions. Like he had prepared for this. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. One stepped closer to Sarah's father, keeping his distance. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the officer said. "We have to take you in for questioning. You're under arrest for the murders of your family members." Her father's eyes flashed briefly, but his expression remained unchanged. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even reacting in the way they expected. "I won't go with you," he said firmly, his voice low but unwavering. "I didn't kill them." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. What was he saying? Of course, he had killed them. She had seen the bodies. She had seen the blood. It was real. The officer looked at him with disbelief. "What do you mean?" "We found." "I didn't kill them," he interrupted, his voice growing more intense. "They weren't supposed to die. Not like this." His words made no sense, but they cut through the air, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. It was as though he was speaking in riddles, but Sarah could hear the hint of truth in his voice. He was telling them something, something that hadn't been fully revealed yet. Her head spun. The answers were there, buried beneath layers of confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Her father knew something, something that would explain everything. But he wasn't saying it. He wasn't giving them the whole truth. Before Sarah could speak, the second officer stepped forward, reaching out to restrain her father. "Sir, you need to come with us now," the officer said, his voice firm. But her father simply shook his head, taking a step back. "No," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere until you understand. Until you know the real reason." The officers looked at each other, confusion clouding their judgment. It was clear that they had no idea how to handle this situation. They had never encountered a case like this before. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. Her frustration boiled over. "Dad, stop," she cried, her voice breaking. "Tell them what happened. Please, tell them what's going on." Her father's gaze shifted to her. For the first time since the chaos had started, he looked at her with something resembling emotion, but it wasn't love or regret. It was something deeper, something more chilling. It was as though he knew something that she wasn't ready to hear. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said softly. Sarah's stomach turned as the weight of his words settled in. Whatever he was hiding, whatever truth lay beneath the surface, it was going to shatter everything she thought she knew. And there was no turning back now. Sarah sat in silence, her thoughts tumbling over one another like a disjointed puzzle. Her father had said he didn't kill them. The words lingered in the air like a strange echo, bouncing off the walls of her mind. She wanted to believe him, she really did. But the reality was far too difficult to accept. The officers had pulled back slightly, still unsure of what to do next. Sarah could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had arrived expecting to find a simple case, a clear-cut suspect, a clear motive, and a straightforward investigation. But they had encountered something far more complicated than they had ever anticipated. And the most difficult part for them was the lack of clarity about her father. He wasn't acting like a murderer. He wasn't even acting like someone who had been caught in the middle of a tragic accident. He seemed almost detached. "I didn't do it," her father repeated, his voice cold but not angry. "The truth will come out, and when it does, you'll understand." The calmness with which he spoke sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Every part of her wanted to scream at him, to demand answers. But she couldn't. She was frozen, caught between the need to know the truth and the fear of what that truth might be. "Please, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me what happened. I don't understand." Her father looked at her with a faint, sorrowful smile. For a moment, it seemed as if he was going to say something that would explain everything. But then, as if an invisible wall had gone up between them, he turned his attention back to the officers. "You're all just missing the bigger picture," he said softly, almost as though speaking to himself. "None of you see it. But you will. You will, eventually." Sarah's frustration grew. "What bigger picture? Dad, just tell me. Why did you do it?" Her father's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of emotion, not fear, but something else. Something dark and painful. "I didn't do it, Sarah," he repeated. "They're all gone because of something much bigger than any of us. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It's beyond anything you could imagine." The officers exchanged glances, growing more perplexed by the second. One of them took a step closer to Sarah's father, speaking more forcefully this time. "We need to take you in, sir," the officer said. "We found the bodies, and we found evidence. It's clear you were involved. But you're not making sense right now. We're trying to help you, but you need to cooperate." Her father's gaze remained unwavering. "I am cooperating," he said. "I'm telling you the truth. But you're not listening. None of you are." The tension in the room was palpable. The officer seemed caught between wanting to arrest him and wanting to understand what he was saying. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold before her. She could see that her father was slipping further and further into a state of detachment, as if he had already accepted something that had been set in motion long before that fateful night. "I didn't kill them," he said again, and there was no hint of doubt in his voice. "It wasn't me. It was always meant to be this way." The words hung in the air, heavy and mysterious. Sarah's mind raced. What did he mean? What was always meant to be this way? And why had he spared her? Why was she the only one left? Her thoughts were interrupted when the second officer, who had been standing quietly at the back, suddenly stepped forward. "Sir, we need to take you to the station. We'll figure this out, but you have to come with us," the officer insisted. "If you keep resisting, we'll have no choice but to take you in forcefully." Her father didn't flinch. He stood there, his posture rigid, his eyes locked onto the officers with an intensity that sent a shiver through Sarah. "I'm not going anywhere," he said calmly. "Not until you understand what's really happening. You can arrest me, you can lock me up, but the truth won't change. You'll see. You'll all see." The officers exchanged uneasy looks. They were unsure how to proceed. It was clear that her father was no longer thinking rationally, if he ever had been. The situation had grown more complicated by the second. But there was something else in the air now, something that none of them could put their finger on. "Dad, please," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "You have to tell me what happened. Why are you saying all of this?" Her father's gaze softened, and for a moment, she saw a glimpse of the man she had known her entire life. The father who had protected her, who had cared for her. The man who had always been there for her. But that man was slipping away, replaced by something else, someone who was consumed by an overwhelming truth, one that Sarah couldn't yet comprehend. "I didn't kill them, Sarah," he said again, his voice quieter this time. "But I couldn't stop it either. I couldn't stop what was coming. I couldn't stop the ones who were really behind it." The words sent a cold rush of fear through Sarah's veins. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who was behind it? What are you talking about?" Her father took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something. "I'm not the man you think I am," he said, his voice low but steady. "I never was." Her mind raced, trying to grasp at what he was saying. "What are you talking about?" she repeated, more forcefully this time. "You've always been my father." "I don't understand." Her father closed his eyes for a brief moment, then looked at her with an almost apologetic expression. "There are things I've been involved in that you can't even begin to understand. Things that go beyond what you see on the surface," he said. "I've been trying to protect you, trying to keep you safe. But I failed. I failed to stop them." "Stop who?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising with desperation. "The ones who were behind it all," her father repeated. "The ones who've been pulling the strings from the beginning." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he was talking about. But one thing was clear, her father wasn't the man she thought he was. Something had happened to him, something that had changed him, twisted him into someone she couldn't recognize. The man who had raised her, the man who had always seemed invincible, had become a stranger in front of her eyes. "You're not making sense, Dad," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "Please, just tell me what happened." "What do you mean, the ones who were behind it all?" Her father's gaze drifted away from her, and his expression darkened. He looked at the officers, his eyes almost pleading with them to understand. "The truth will come out eventually," he said. "But it's too dangerous for you to know now. If you want to live, if you want to survive, you need to stay away from me." "Dad!" Sarah cried, taking a step forward. "What are you talking about? You're scaring me." Her father's eyes met hers one last time, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something deep within them, a sorrow, a regret, and a hint of fear. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, the officers moved in, finally making the decision to take control of the situation. "We're taking you in, sir," the first officer said firmly, placing his hand on her father's shoulder. "It's time for answers." Her father didn't resist. He stood still as the officer handcuffed him, his expression unreadable. Sarah stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before her. Her world was collapsing, piece by piece, and she had no idea how to stop it. Her father, the man who had always been her protector, was slipping away from her. And with him, the answers she desperately needed seemed to be slipping through her fingers. As her father was led away by the officers, Sarah felt a deep, gnawing emptiness inside her. She knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a truth so dark and twisted that she might never be able to escape it. The heavy, metallic clang of the prison door echoed in Sarah's ears as it slammed shut behind her. She felt a rush of nausea rise up in her throat, the reality of the situation crashing down like a wave. She was standing in the cold, sterile hallway of the local detention center, her hands trembling as she clutched the thin jacket around her shoulders. The air smelled faintly of bleach and fear, and she could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her with every breath. Her father was in there. Behind that door. Behind those walls. A part of Sarah still couldn't wrap her mind around it. She had seen the man who had raised her, who had always been her protector, now locked away like a criminal. It felt wrong. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She wanted to believe him, to trust his words. But every part of her screamed that something wasn't right. She had questions, so many questions, but no answers. Every time she tried to make sense of what had happened, her mind was only met with more confusion. "You're sure you want to see him?" The officer's voice broke through her thoughts. Sarah turned to face him. The officer was tall and broad-shouldered, his face serious but not unkind. He had been the one to escort her into the detention center, and now he was giving her a choice she wasn't sure she could make. "I need to," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to talk to him. I need to understand." The officer nodded, stepping aside to allow her to move forward. He led her down the narrow hallway, passing cells that were eerily silent. Each one held a person whose story was undoubtedly as complex and dark as her own. The low murmur of voices mixed with the sound of distant footsteps, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made Sarah's skin crawl. They stopped in front of a small, barred door. The officer knocked twice before opening it, revealing a stark, dimly lit room beyond. It was a visitation room, the kind where families and lawyers met with prisoners. The walls were bare, and the only furniture in the room was a small table and two metal chairs, both bolted to the floor. There was a thick sheet of glass between Sarah and her father, with a small slot at the bottom for passing documents and speaking. Her father was sitting on the other side, staring at the table in front of him. He looked the same, worn, exhausted, and distant. But there was something else in his eyes now. A hollow emptiness that seemed to consume him from the inside out. The officer left the room, closing the door behind him. Sarah took a deep breath and approached the glass. She placed her hand against it, feeling the coldness seep into her skin. Her father's gaze slowly lifted, and their eyes met for the first time in what felt like forever. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I need to understand. Please, tell me what happened. Why are you saying all of this? Why did you kill them?" Her father didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just looked at her, his face a mixture of sadness and regret. It was as if he were trying to find the right words, but even after everything that had happened, he still couldn't bring himself to say them. "I didn't kill them, Sarah," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I've told you that. I told you the truth." Sarah's heart sank. She wanted to scream at him, to demand more. But somehow, she knew it wouldn't help. He wasn't lying, at least, not in the way she thought. But what did he mean? "Then who did?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Who did?" Her father took a long breath, his eyes closing for a moment. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in his gaze. "You won't believe me, Sarah," he said quietly. "But I need to tell you the truth, no matter how hard it is." Sarah nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "Please. Just tell me." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a group. A group that's been behind everything, the deaths, the cover-up. They've been pulling strings for years. And I got caught up in it. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. They're too powerful." Sarah's mind was racing. She had heard rumors, whispers about underground organizations, about powerful people who controlled everything from the shadows. But this was something far worse than she could have ever imagined. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are they?" Her father hesitated. "They don't have a name that you would recognize. They're not just a criminal organization. They're something much bigger. Much more dangerous." He paused again, looking away for a moment, as if searching for something, a way to explain it, maybe, or a reason to justify the things he had done. Sarah's pulse quickened, her hands growing clammy. "Why me?" she blurted out, the question that had been gnawing at her since the night of the murders. "Why did they leave me alive? Why didn't they kill me too?" Her father's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw the depth of the pain in them. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't understand it myself. But they had their reasons. Maybe they thought you could be controlled. Maybe they thought you would never find out the truth. Or maybe they just wanted you to be the one to carry the weight of it all." A sick feeling settled in the pit of Sarah's stomach. The thought that her father might have been forced to make a choice between saving her or saving himself, was almost too much to bear. But it made sense. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that nothing had been simple. There were layers to this story that she hadn't even begun to peel back. "I don't want this, Dad," she said quietly. "I don't want any of this." Her father's gaze softened even further. "I know, Sarah. I know. But there's no going back now. The truth is out. And once it's out, there's no stopping it." "What truth?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What truth are you talking about?" Her father's lips pressed together in a thin line. He looked down for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, then met her eyes again. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air like an unsolved riddle. "The group," he continued, his voice low, "they're not just pulling strings in the background. They've been manipulating people, entire families, entire communities. They use fear, they use manipulation. And now, they're coming for you." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "Because they can't let anyone stop them. They'll do whatever it takes to keep their power, even if it means killing everyone in their way." The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around her as the reality of her situation hit her full force. Her father wasn't just a criminal. He wasn't just a man who had killed his family for reasons no one understood. He was a victim of something much larger than himself. And now, she was caught in the middle of it all. "I didn't want you to be a part of this, Sarah," her father whispered. "But you are. You always have been. And now, they'll come for you too." Her world seemed to shift on its axis. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if the very foundation of everything she had ever known was crumbling. She wasn't just trying to find out who killed her family. She was trying to survive something much darker, something that had been lurking in the shadows all along. The truth had only begun to reveal itself. And with each revelation, Sarah was drawn deeper into a web of lies, secrets, and danger. She wasn't sure what she would do next, or how she could ever escape the grip of the people who had already destroyed so much of her life. But one thing was certain, the game had changed. And there was no going back now. Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, the harsh light of the room casting long shadows on the walls around her. She hadn't slept in days, and the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind would race with questions, each one more desperate than the last. What did it all mean? Why had her father killed her family? Why had they left her alive? Who were these people that he kept talking about? But now, as the days passed, she found herself fighting a more pressing battle, one that had nothing to do with the past. The danger was real, and it was closing in. Her phone buzzed again. She had been ignoring it for hours, but this time, she couldn't help but look. A message from an unknown number. "They're watching you. You need to leave. Now." Her heart skipped a beat. Panic surged through her veins as the walls seemed to close in around her. Who was this? How did they know? More importantly, why now? She jumped up, pacing around the room, her thoughts racing. Could this be the group her father had warned her about? Could they be the ones behind everything? There was only one way to find out. Her mind immediately turned to the next steps. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not the police, not even her own family. Everyone had lied to her, and now the truth was a weight she couldn't bear. But there was one person she could turn to, someone who had been with her since the very beginning. Liam. Liam had been her best friend since childhood, always the one who could calm her down in the midst of chaos. He knew things about her family that no one else did. He knew about her father's work, his connections, even the strange things she had witnessed growing up. He had always been there to listen, to help her make sense of the impossible. If anyone could help her now, it was Liam. But would he even believe her? Could he help her when everything had already spiraled out of control? Sarah grabbed her jacket and shoved her phone into her pocket. She needed answers, and Liam was her only chance. Liam's apartment was dark when Sarah arrived. The streetlights flickered above her, casting an eerie glow on the empty sidewalks. The air was thick with tension, as if something was about to happen. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. She knocked on the door, her pulse quickening with each passing second. It seemed like hours before Liam finally appeared, his face full of concern when he saw her standing there, looking disheveled and terrified. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft with worry. "What's going on? Why didn't you call?" She didn't waste any time. The words rushed out of her mouth before she could stop them. "I need your help, Liam. They're coming for me. I don't know who they are or why, but they're coming. My father, he was part of something dangerous. And now I'm involved. You have to help me." Liam's face went pale. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "Come inside. Let's talk." As they sat in Liam's small living room, Sarah poured out everything, her father's confession, the strange message, the people who had killed her family. Liam listened intently, his face a mixture of disbelief and concern. "I don't know what to believe, Sarah," Liam said finally. This is insane. But I know you're not lying. You've never lied to me. And I'll help you, no matter what." Sarah looked at him, her heart racing. She was beginning to feel a strange sense of calm. Maybe she wasn't completely alone in this after all. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam stood up, pacing. "We need to figure out who's behind this. We need to find out who's pulling the strings. And we need to do it quickly, before they find you." He paused, looking out the window as if searching for something. "You said your father was involved in some kind of underground group. Do you have any idea who they are? Or how far their reach goes?" Sarah thought for a moment. Her father's words echoed in her mind. They're not just a criminal organization. They're something much bigger. Much more dangerous. "I don't know who they are," she said finally. "But they've been pulling strings for years. They've destroyed so many lives, and now, they want mine." Liam nodded, his expression darkening. "Then we need to get to the bottom of this. And we need to do it fast." They spent the next few hours researching. Liam scoured the internet, looking for any connections between her father's death and the mysterious group. Sarah went through old papers, journals, anything her father had left behind. They found nothing concrete, only vague references to a powerful, shadowy organization that had been operating in the background for decades. But nothing that would lead them to the truth. Just as Sarah was about to give up, she found something, a journal entry, buried deep within her father's notes. It was dated just a few months before the murders. "I've finally found them. The group behind everything. They call themselves the Circle." Her hands shook as she read the rest of the entry. Her father had discovered the truth. He had been trying to take them down. But it was too late. They had already gotten to him. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Circle. The name sent a chill down her spine. It was a name she had never heard before, but it was a name that would haunt her from that moment on. "What is this?" Liam asked, looking over her shoulder. "What does it mean?" "It means my father was right," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. "He was trying to stop them. And now they're coming for me too." The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. Liam helped Sarah disappear, moving her to a safe house in the middle of nowhere. But the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They weren't safe. Not yet. As Sarah sat alone in the dimly lit room, her mind raced with thoughts of what she had uncovered. Her father had been right. The Circle wasn't just any organization. They were a global network of influential people, politicians, business leaders, military officials, who controlled everything from the shadows. They had been behind countless tragedies, manipulating events to suit their own needs. But why had they come for her family? Why had they killed everyone but her? Sarah's mind kept returning to the same question. The one thing that didn't make sense. The one thing that had always haunted her, why had they left her alive? And then it hit her. Her father's last words, maybe they thought you could be controlled. It was all coming together. Sarah wasn't just a victim of their plan. She was part of it. The circle had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to bring her into their fold. They wanted her to be a part of their world. They wanted to use her. But she wouldn't let them. With new determination, Sarah made a vow to herself. She wouldn't let the circle control her. She wouldn't be their pawn. It was time to take back her life. And so, with Liam by her side, Sarah set off on the hardest journey of her life, one that would take her into the heart of darkness itself. The final chapter of her story was just beginning.